Welcome to the London Business School Willard Institute for Business and Development COVID-19 series. Today, we are very pleased and honored and very happy to have with us Leonard Wantchekon, Professor of Political Science and International Affairs at Princeton University. Leonard combined something unique in academia. In his youth, he fought for democracy in his country of origin, Benin. Subsequently, he came to the States. He had a prolific career in political science. He served for many years as professor of politics at New York University before moving to Princeton. He has done path-breaking research on African development, its colonial origins. He has studied intergenerational mobility and various other issues. Moreover, recently, as of 2014, he has been the founder and the president, or the founding president of the African School of Economics, set up initially in Benin, and from what I recently heard, they are about to open a branch in Ivory Coast, trying to do the best to promote education and economics education, more specifically in West Africa. Leonard, it's a real honor to have you with us today and discuss how COVID-19 is unfolding in Africa and West Africa, perhaps in particular. Thanks a lot for being with us.
Yeah, thank you very much. My pleasure.
Well, before we get started, sadly, at the FT and the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and the Guardian, we don't hear so much about what's happening in West Africa. So why don't you give us an overview of what's happening on the ground?
Yeah, thank you very much. So I think the health situation in Africa is, I should say, very encouraging, at least comparative to what's happening elsewhere. So we have a total of, so far, less than 3,000 deaths. And many countries, for instance, have some 2 or 3 and sometimes 200 maximum. So the health situation is quite, you can say to some degree, is under control. There are several reasons. One is perhaps that the characteristic of the virus might be different in Africa than elsewhere. It could also be done to the fact that the infection or the transmission came quite late. But more importantly, the population in Africa is quite young. 70% of African population is less than 30 years old. And so, I should say that as a result of this, the economic impact is not as drastic as people have thought earlier, because as you can imagine, early on, the World Health Organization and the UN was basically estimating the death toll to be up to 300 at least, and maybe several million. So we are not there. So the situation is actually more encouraging, I should say, than elsewhere.
So now let us turn to economics, because we have seen many countries from Africa and many other frontier economies from Asia, from the Americas, seeking the support of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, because there is an exodus of capital from those countries. How is this affecting developments in Africa?
The immediate impact of COVID-19 in Africa is the slowdown of economic activities, particularly tourism, agricultural export, and also lower kind of government revenues as a result of this. And also, as you mentioned earlier, because of the very dire estimation that we had earlier, some, basically capital flight, if you will. So the immediate result of this is that income has dropped, especially in cities, between 25 to 40% in many cases. And but given that the lockdown was a bit limited, there were still some ongoing kind of economic activities and economic transaction. So as a result, the drastic rise in unemployment that we see in the US is not happening yet. And I think it's good that we have the international economic community expecting the worst and working towards debt relief and other economic measure, to limit the negative impact. So what I can say is that what's happening in the US and Europe is not, it's not exactly the same magnitude of what's happening currently, in Africa. So the health situation, as I mentioned earlier, is a bit mild in its negative impacts, but the economic impact is also more or less similar. So there is still a lot that could possibly happen in the near future, but currently we can assert that there is some downturn, but it's far from being catastrophic.
Okay, and my subsequent question was that we know from academic research that, for example, commodity price declines or severe economic crisis in low-income countries related even to rainfall can spur conflict, civil unrest, even witch hunting. So do you anticipate that we will see something of that, especially in countries such as Nigeria, where they're like oil dependent, especially their tax base?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. So clearly, countries with natural resources like Nigeria, like Angola, like Congo, Cameroon, for instance, they might be more affected than the rest. So that's for sure. And the collapse of oil prices, for instance, will clearly have a negative impact. Now, but if that situation is transitory and it doesn't last several years, if, for instance, the oil prices move up a little bit, and if, for instance, commodity prices like cocoa and coffee from Côte d'Ivoire move up a little bit, I think we are not going to reach like a situation where we face major kind of political crisis. I think, again, we have to be very thankful of the fact that the death toll is limited, even in those countries. And so as a result, it's hard. I mean, the resentments against government is also quite limited as a result, because they haven't done anything which is really we can be considered very bad. As a result, support for government policies haven't declined. So I can say that if the situation remains a little bit what it is currently in terms of commodity prices, oil prices, it doesn't last too long. So I think the political situation is not going to change. As you can see, I haven't heard anything, no major change like in all the African countries, whether it's Nigeria, whether it's Angola, whether it's Côte d'Ivoire. So since the worst is to some degree behind us, things are still bad around the world, but the much worse and worse is behind us. So given that, I don't think there is a real risk of a major political conflict as a result of COVID-19.
I see. So my next question is how do you see things to evolve in the quarters, I guess, or the years to come? So I sense that you are more on the positive, optimist side.
Yeah. So the way I think it will depend quite a bit on what we do. So I think there is a major kind of action from G7, G20, that's positive. In terms of the crisis, that's positive. There are a lot of initiatives for emergency aid for African countries. That's all positive. But I think it should be the resources that have been mobilized should be directed towards supporting those industries and those sectors that have been heavily hit by the crisis, notably like the the tourism industry and also commodity exports kind of sectors. But also, it's important really that we use this opportunity to prepare for possible outbreak in the future. And the way we do it by investing in research, investing in prevention, So, and also besides that, also one of the mitigating kind of strategies that can be used is digitalization. For instance, we need to think about how markets, open markets in African cities, for instance, can move slightly online, how logistics and transportation, for instance, can be dealt with if there is a new lockdown, and since we are not in the middle of a big crisis, at least in Africa now, this is the time, to make the appropriate investments to make sure that if something happens, we are ready. We can have, mitigating effect. I mean that we can have already in place some mitigating measure to prevent in Africa what's currently happening in Europe and North America.
Well, let me pose a question here that I'm asking all of the people that have the privilege to interview. So, what is the role of African business here? So, typically, businesses, as you are aware, in Africa, typically are seen as part of the problem rather than part of the solution. So, how do you see the role of business, local, and I would say also multinationals, in the period to come?
The current situation presents a risk for businesses, because their access to credit is limited, access to the opportunity to exports are also very limited. And also many of them face a lot of very uncertain kind of political environment. So as a result, they don't take a lot of risk, in terms of innovation, in terms of investment, and so on. But the flip side is that this is the opportunity, for instance, for all major businesses, for instance, to develop IT technology, to develop alternative ways of buying and selling goods, transportation. So I will see in the near future some push for major investments in IT and logistics. I can see, for instance, many small Amazon, for instance, type kind of sector developing, or Alibaba type developing. It's a movement which clearly will help the growth of the private sector in Africa. So that's why what I'm saying is this is the time for government, for international community to really, help African small businesses, major-sized businesses grow in that specific area. But then the second part that I think, this is that we don't stress enough is research and development. Like one thing that I think, is missing currently is the perception. No, let me put it. Most, in Africa, people consider research as a luxury, not as a necessity, not as a survival strategy. And this is a problem, and we see from the current situation that research shouldn't be concentrated in England, in the US. I'm talking about scientific research, microbiology, epidemiology, the basic knowledge that we need to deal with this kind of situations. Those kind of knowledge should be also developed in developing countries as well. Capacity should be built elsewhere so that, they can be part of a rapid response to a crisis like this, And so I think that two ways, so to summarize, two ways to support the private sector growth in Africa today is IT investment, research and development, and I hope that, the resource that being mobilized currently will go in large part toward this, so that since we are not hit hard currently, the best is to prepare to use this opportunity to provide the infrastructure for development, the private sector, but also the public sector.
I like this message, invest in prevention, invest in research and development.
Exactly. Yeah.
Leonard, thank you very much for being with us today and sharing your experience and insights. It's a real pleasure and honor to have you here.
Thank you.